Okay, hello everybody, and welcome. Today is Monday, January 27th, 2025, and I am calling the Planning Commission meeting to order here at 6:30 p.m. Our meeting tonight is being conducted both in person and online. Members of the public may attend in person, or they may also watch this meeting online at burnsville.mn/meetings, or you can view us on Comcast Channel 16 and or Channel 859. The public can also join us on Zoom by going to zoom.us/join. More information is available on our meetings webpage and also in the agenda for today's meeting. The first item on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Do we have any changes to the agenda from commissioners? Seeing none, any changes or updates to the agenda from staff?
Not this time.
The agenda is good. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Motion.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Motion and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Second item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on January 13th. Any changes to the minutes from commissioners? There is a change to the minutes.
The change.
Commissioner John.
I noticed on the bottom of the report, it talked about Commissioner Timmerman and the approval on a couple of items. He wasn't even here, so I couldn't approve them.
Good.
I'll also abstain from voting on the minutes.
So just one thing to note.
Okay, that's a good catch. Is that and how do we make that correction? Is that something that staff can make? Okay, great. So I would entertain a motion for approve. Well, let's see here. Any changes to the minutes from staff?
Besides that one, no.
Okay.
I will make the motion
Okay.
to approve the minutes, less the approvals from Commissioner Timmerman.
Excellent. So there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Our third item, this is our first public hearing of the night. This is the application of Tri-State Bobcat LLC for a preliminary and final plat to be known as Tri-State Bobcat Second Edition, and a variance to reduce the minimum lot size, lot width, and side yard parking setback. Presenting is Connor Jakes, Associate Planner. Mr. Jakes, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Great to be with you this evening. The item before you is a public hearing, as you mentioned. Tri-State Bobcat has applied for a preliminary plat, final plat, and variance for the site at 12111 12th Avenue South. The site is currently zoned I-1 Industrial Park. Sites to the north and to the east are also zoned I-1. The site is bounded by 12th Avenue to the west, and then to the south is zoned B3 General Business. I will note the applicant before you does own that site directly to the south. That is zoned B3 General Business. A little background on the subject site. The site was originally developed in the early 1970s for a restaurant use. A restaurant did operate on site until 2022 when it closed. The site has been vacant since that restaurant closed in 2022. In July of 2022, the applicant, Tri-State Bobcat, did purchase the subject site for future expansion at such time that their business experienced growth to that point for expansion. Tri-State has operated at their current location in the city since 2014 and does specialize in the sale, service, and repair of outdoor motorized equipment. So the first application before you is the preliminary plat. I wanted to note three things specifically. The first is that the gray area shown within the subject site is impervious surface coverage. Just to call out that the site was developed prior to the current zoning standards and lot standards that are in the I-1 zoning district, which is why some of the things you see currently on the lot wouldn't appear to meet current standards, which is because it was constructed prior to current standards. The second thing to note is tree removal. The applicant is proposing 100% tree removal for future construction. The I-1 zoning district allows up to 60% removal. Anything over that is subject to either reforestation, say applicant planting trees to reforest, or the city can collect a cash fee in lieu of that replacement when it's not practical. In this case, given the surrounding sites are developed and the subject site is developed for some time, a cash fee is the preferred route, which is stipulated in the staff report. And the third item to call out was the right-of-way dedication on the west side The current parcel boundary does go into 12th Avenue, so that would be cleaned up with the final plat and preliminary plat, and that's approximately 5,000 square feet of right-of-way dedication. So the final plat is on screen before you. The applicant has proposed the required easement per the subdivision ordinance and the city engineer's requirements. And then the third and final application before you is a variance. There are 3 variance requests. The first is to reduce the minimum lot area, the second to reduce the minimum lot width, and the third to reduce the side yard parking setback from 5 feet to 0 feet in order to allow for an internal site access connection between the subject site and the site to the south that the applicant owns. So again, that reduction to the side yard parking setback is just for the drive access aisle and not that entire south boundary. So at the time that the applicant comes for a building permit, that width would be concluded, and then that side yard setback would just be reduced for that width. The planning considerations before you, the first is that practical difficulties do exist to support the proposed variance. Again, the site was constructed prior to the lot standards and zoning requirements that are in place current day and prior to the applicant's purchase of the property. The subject site has not been platted previously, as city code didn't require it at the time of original development in the early 70s. And the proposal is in overall alignment with the subdivision ordinance, zoning ordinance, and comprehensive plan. The recommendation is on screen. Staff does recommend that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council the approval of the preliminary plat, final plat, and variance subject to the 5 conditions of approval. The first condition is the applicant shall incorporate into the final plat the recommendations, requirements, and evaluations noted in the Bolton and Mink memorandum dated January 16th, 2025, subject to modifications that are agreed to by the applicant and city engineer. All comments shall be adopted herein by reference. Condition 2, prior to the issuance of a building permit, the final plat shall be recorded with the Dakota County Recorder's Office. Condition 3, prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall satisfy the required fee of $6,088.70 for exceeding the allowable percentage of tree removal threshold. The fourth condition is that the preliminary and final plat approvals shall expire 1 year after City Council approvals unless a final plat has been recorded with the Dakota County Recorder's Office or the City Council approves an extension. And the fifth and final condition, prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall record a cross-access easement agreement for the internal drive access that does stipulate the access and long-term maintenance requirements. With that, the recommendation is on screen. Staff's available for questions, and then the applicant is in attendance as well.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Anderson.
There's 2 entrances right now off of 12th. Will one of those be closed when they build the building?
At this stage, the applicant would propose to close one of those and just have one site access to the property.
Commissioner Timmerman.
Thank you. The platting in the past has come along with park dedication fees, and I know that the city has been reconsidering or looking at that after some litigation. Can you provide an update on that, and if we will ever see park dedication fees aligned with platting again?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Commissioner Timmerman, I'll defer the current status of the park dedication ordinance to Planning Manager Marosla, but I will note, related to this application specifically, state statute does allow municipalities to collect park dedication if there's a subdivision with the creation of new lots and or the increase of dwelling units. Given the current application is just to plat an existing property and not create a new lot or add increased dwelling units, it wouldn't be subject to park dedication requirements. So that's why there's no park dedication with this application.
I would say that's a strong answer for this particular project, so maybe at the end, after we get through our agenda items, maybe we can get an update on that. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner John.
Yeah, has there always been a buyout option on the forestation?
Yeah, Commissioner John. Only when reforestation isn't practical or there isn't a high chance of survivability, then we would allow a cash fee. In this case, given the lot size is quite small for the I-1 district, the applicant wouldn't be able to fit the newly required plantings with the construction of a new building and plant the reforestation trees for that. So staff has allowed the cash fee in this case because it makes sense for the project. But generally, we would require collect the reforestation through the planting of trees when it's practical.
Is it based on a percentage? Is that where the dollar amount comes from?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson.
I noticed when I was over there today that they were trimming the trees and doesn't look like they were removing all of them. Have they changed their stand on that?
I'll let the applicant speak to that, but at this point, I believe it's still planned for 100% tree removal. But the applicant can speak to that
Okay.
in more detail.
If there's no further questions, maybe we'll open up the public hearing and the applicant can speak at that time. Any other last questions for staff? Okay. So we will open up the public hearing here at 6:41 p.m. And anyone in the audience who'd like to speak to this matter, you're welcome to step forward and approach the podium. And while we wait for that, I'll just check, is there anyone on Zoom? Nobody on Zoom? Do you have a question for the applicant?
I'd
About
like
the-
them to
about the
answer
trees?
that
Yeah, oh yeah,
question.
do you mind stepping forward? And if you could state your name and address for the record and,
My home address
or your work address.
Oh, okay. My name's Jonathan Quirk, and I'm with Tri-State Bobcat. My father and I own and operate Tri-State Bobcat. We are located, our main office is located at 1200 Highway 13 East in Burnsville, Minnesota. To address the tree removal, we've started today on taking down the trees, and by the end of the week, we should have most of all those removed. So just in the process of doing that. So, waited until the weather was a little bit nicer to start the project, so.
Thank you, and thank you for expanding your business in Burnsville. We really
Yeah, we
appreciate
really
that.
look forward to it.
Yeah, any other questions for the applicant or comments? Commissioner John?
I just had a question. So you're moving forward with building the warehouse and all that? Or office space on that
Yep.
property?
Yep,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
yeah, so.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, it's been in the works for a little while, but, so we just started to do it this year, start the process, so.
That's awesome.
Thank you, yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, thank you. Have a good night.
Yep, you too.
Thanks.
And seeing no other commenters, I'm sorry, Commissioner Hamilton.
Thank you. I think this is more towards staff. Does this require any type of fencing or berm surrounding the property or part of the property? Or just open?
Yeah, Commissioner Hamilton, city code does not require any berming. It does require landscape plantings, but not specific berming or anything of,
No fencing?
no fencing required.
If I can add to that, Commissioners, the proposal for the site after tonight's approval of the preliminary plat is an 8,000 square foot office warehouse building. And I believe the applicant's proposing to store some materials inside the building. No exterior storage is proposed on site. All exterior storage would occur on the principal property. This building here, they're planning on using for the short term, but it could be more of a spec building for future lease out selling in the future. But it's 8,000 square feet office warehouse with some dock doors.
I'm going to close the public hearing, and then we can maybe continue any questions or discussion. So close the public hearing here at 6:44. Any other questions for staff or any other discussion amongst commissioners? Any recommendations for any motions? Commissioner Timmerman.
I will move that the planning commission recommended the city council approval of the preliminary plat, final plat, and variance subject to the 5 conditions that were presented this evening.
Seconded by Commissioner John. We have a motion and seconded. We'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So the motion carries and it is unanimous. This will be the city council meeting on February 25th. So in a couple weeks. The next item on our agenda, this is a Our next public hearing, we'll also be holding a public hearing here. This is the application of the City of Burnsville to amend the City Code Title 10, Chapter 22D, Section 5, to update parking standards for multifamily developments and add additional language to clarify the parking requirements for the Transit-Oriented Development, TOD, District. Presenting will be our Planning Manager, Mr. Morosla. Please proceed.
All right, good evening, Chair and Commissioners. So a little background on this subject. At the February 13th, 2024 meeting, the City Council directed staff to bring forward a discussion on the park requirements in the TOD district. That was based off the parking study that was completed previously to that. So on October 15th, 2024, staff did bring the current ordinance forward and discuss a couple options how to mitigate some concerns that the city has seen in the TOD district, specifically around multifamily projects and the sites being potentially underparked. So the current standard for parking requirements in high density and mixed use developments within the community requires 1.5 stalls per unit, 0.25 stalls for visitors, for a total of 1.75 stalls per unit. It's worth noting that at least one garage stall per unit is required, so underground parking. So we get to the TOD district. They do carry over that standard of a minimum of one enclosed garage space per unit applies to TOD. Then the TOD district does have an automatic reduction of 25%. The intent of that reduction is to account for reduced daily trips generated for the proximity of utilization of nearby transit stations. Another thing in the TOD district is if on-street parking is provided directly in front of the site, they can use that towards fulfilling their parking requirements. Additional standards in the TOD districts. The TOD district does allow for additional reductions, up to a 25% reduction for car share spaces. Sites within 500 feet of a designated transit station can receive up to a 20%. Dedication of land or construction of bus stop facilities is another 20%. And connections to bus stops is another 20%. The current code's unclear if you can use all those at once. So as part of this amendment, we are clarifying that. If you were to implement all these reductions, you can probably get up to upwards of 75% reduction in your parking requirements, which would result in some underparked sites. So as part of this update, we are proposing to clean up this section of the code. So first amendment that we're proposing is we're adding a calculating method. The calculating method is if you take the total parking required, so the 1.75 times the number of units, and then take that 25% off there. Because when we were looking as a staff, we calculate at least two different ways of calculating parking. You can do it this way, or you take the 25% off the total, or you can do another way. I'm not going to get into details, but it's pretty much taking your surface parking and deducting 25%, because you're required to have that one stall covered. So 1 per 1 there, and then actually you take it off the surface parking. So we put in there a method of calculating parking, and also for consistency. That's the big thing. We've seen some different variations of calculations in past staff reports, so we thought it'd be nice to provide a consistency in there going forward. The amendment also removes the ability to count on-street parking. That on-street parking is for visitors to the area. It shouldn't be utilized by residents parking on the street because they have nowhere else to park. So that's the intent on that one. And then we also are proposing to limit the additional parking reductions to 20% on top of the 25, so 45% total. National parking standards for TOD districts recommend parking from 20 to 50% reductions of parking, depending on the strength of the transit in the area. Since COVID, we have seen a decrease in transit usage, and overall, with this district, throughout its development, we've seen the ridership not totally be there like previously thought, looking back at staff reports. So we thought the capping it at 45% would be fitting. Now, that 45% does not impact multifamily. I'll talk about that here. This is strictly for businesses, commercial, anything like that is capped at 45. Now, for multifamily, we're capping it at 25%. The table on the screen here shows the examples of it. Example 1 is the 25% reduction. So we have a total units of 170. They're required 1.75 stalls per unit, so the required parking is 279. You take 25% off the top, so you remove 74 stalls. The required parking for that site is 223. That's a surplus of 53 stalls on top of the amount of units on site. Now, for example 2, we're gonna say that building's within 500 feet of a transit station. So you get a 20% reduction on top of the 25%, so 45% total. So the required parking still is 279 units. However, you're taking off 45% or 126 units. That's stalls, excuse me. That's 153. Luckily, the code states you have to have the 1 per 1. So you have the 170 on site underground, but there's no parking for visitors. And so that's what the council's direction was, is to fix this little loophole in there. So that's why we're proposing to cap it at the 25. It meets the national standard for TOD parking, being between 20% and 50%, so 25. We can always revisit it. Another thing we did too, the current code does allow for an opportunity of joint parking. If you have joint parking, you should be able to meet parking. That's just a standard, so we remove that as well. So if there's an opportunity for joint parking, you should be able to meet the required parking then. You shouldn't be able to get a reduction for that. So the proposal in front of you, that's our proposed amendments, following council's direction at that workshop. So staff recommends the planning commission recommend to the city council approval of the proposed amendment to section 1022D-5, subsection D, subject to minor modifications as determined by the city attorney. At the time of writing this, the city attorney did not review it. He has reviewed it now and supports the changes in front of us. He also had some other minor modifications, but we will get to that when we get to the zoning code. And that's it. I can stand for any questions.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner John.
So I know we recently did a parking study on, what were the results in the TOD district, or was there a lot of over parking or under parking, I guess, what you would call it?
Yeah, Chair and Commissioner John, that's a good question. So a lot of the sites, there's a few sites within the TOD district that are currently underparked. The Maven is a good example of that one. Mm-hmm. That one is right next to a transit station. There's a parking ramp, but that one and a couple other ones in that general facility that are within that 500 feet that get that significant reduction are underparked, and there's been some struggles with parking down there from law enforcement and cross parking concerns. There was a lawsuit back in 22, I believe, about some cross parking. So that study came out saying that some modifications should be reviewed, and that's why we're here today.
So I have a question. So these existing buildings that have that are underparked, these rules will not apply to those buildings. Those buildings exist and they met the rules at the time. And so this is really for new buildings being proposed.
That is correct, Chair. It is worth knowing the two projects that are currently under construction, MWF and Roars' projects, they do exceed standards. The nice part about the MWF, which is located at the Diamond Head site, it's 48 units. There's a cross parking agreement there, and it's off-peak uses. Daytime for the school there, and then evening it's empty, so it works out perfectly. There's plenty of parking there due to the cross parking easement. And then on the Roars site, I cannot remember the name of that project on my head. That one there did have additional surface parking to exceed the required 1 point. I think it does park perfectly at the 1.75, if I remember correctly. There's 220 some stalls there. There's 170 units.
Question for staff. I think Commissioner Anderson had his hand up first.
The underparking sites, is that somewhat because they're charging too much rent and people don't want to pay it for the building parking?
There is some sites we have had, not necessarily in this district. We did have another site within the community where we did have a parking concern due to additional fees for parking. However, we worked with the applicant, the property owner, to address that as they were not meeting their parking. You know, the approval required amount of parking, you need to park your vehicles on site. So you need to figure it out. And so we worked with the property owner to address it, and they reduced their rates to reduce the impacts on the surrounding area. And so that's something we have to have a good communication with. the property owners. And we did receive a complaint on one of the newer projects in the community that just opened in TOD, and they went back to their calcs and took a look at it, and we have not received any complaints since then. So I think more or less from a city staff perspective is bringing this to their attention, that we're receiving complaints, and most of the time, can't speak for everyone, the landlords or property owners will adjust their rates to make sure they're in compliance, so that residents can park on site. And so far, we've had good luck with that in my time, my 7 months.
Commissioner, oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Hamilton.
All right, so I'm trying to wrap my head around this, okay. What's the impact to the citizens that are gonna be living in these multifamily units?
The impact via the improved park, the proposal in front of us tonight.
Right,
So so what we found as staff, as we looked back at staff reports and previously, is that there was not enough parking for additional vehicles and guests. So as ordinance states, you get the one covered stall or enclosed, you get the one per one. But these reductions actually take off the additional parking for guests, and some people may have more than one car. So that's what really hurts, is the availability for guest parking. And then if you count the on-street parking on top of that, there's nowhere to park, because residents are parking on the street. So you put that clause, remove that clause, that provides on-street parking for guests, and then require additional parking on site to fulfill that.
Commissioner John.
There's no overnight parking, correct, still?
Correct.
Nowhere in the city?
I believe there is some do utilize the parking garage down there by the Ames Center,
Okay.
especially at the Maven there, where the overflow from that one.
Inside the garage, but not outside, correct? Yeah.
But that's another thing I should mention too. We did not receive any when we did the public hearing notice in the newspaper, we didn't receive any comments, and the police department does support this, as they do get the parking complaints. So they inform us that we receive a complaint, then I contact the development and say that we're receiving complaints, we need to address this, and usually everyone complies. Usually.
So I think we'll maybe move to our public hearing, then we'll have an opportunity for a little bit more discussion or final questions before we make a motion. So I'll open the public hearing for this item here at 6:57. And there is not anybody in the council chambers to approach the podium. Is there anybody online who wants to speak to this? So there's nobody here nobody present that wants to speak to this item. So I'm going to close the public hearing again at 6:57. And we'll move this into any last discussion, questions, or a motion from commissioners. Commissioner John.
Well, I think we can make a motion. I think this all makes sense. So I would like to make a motion that we recommend to City Council to approve the proposed amendment to Section 10-22D-5, subject to minor modifications as determined by the city attorney, which I believe there are none, correct?
Correct.
So there's a motion. It's been seconded by Commissioner Braddock. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. So that was our last public hearing. The next item on our agenda are updates. The one update that I see, our next planning commission meeting is scheduled for February 10th, 2025. Are there any further updates from commissioners?
I'm just hoping we can have a brief discussion about the park dedication fees.
Oh, yeah, let's do that. Would this be an appropriate time to
Yes.
do that? Okay, let's do that right now. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah, you heard my question earlier. I'm just curious if there's updates on kind of the progress of park dedication fees when properties are being platted, and if we'll see that again in the future.
Yep, that's a great question, Commissioner. So we did just recently get an updated draft copy of the ordinance from our city attorney. They've been reviewing it, and the language within that red line at least says exactly what Associate Planner Jake said, that we cannot charge park dedication unless you're creating more than one lot of record. And so the case in front of us tonight meets that finding. So going forward, we're hopefully gonna have that at a work session here, I believe in March or April of city council, and then it'll come forward to this body as part of that. The whole intent behind the update is to streamline the language and make it consistent with state statute.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So, any other updates from staff?
Not at this time, Chair.
Okay. The last item on our agenda is adjournment. I would look to the commissioners for a motion to adjourn.
Make a
Commission-
motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening.